Hey, everybody, this is Wake Up Call Live. I'm your host, Christina Previtt, and joining me today is immigration and human rights attorney Jessica Smith Bobadilla, who's based out of California. And we're here today to talk about a very important issue, and that is what is going to happen to potentially the Afghan refugees according to U.S. law. And there's nobody that I would trust more with this topic than Jessica. So, welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Christina. Thanks for setting this up. And I think it's a great topic that we can all discuss and we can all try to figure out how to respond to this humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it is. I assume that the people that are watching are already familiar with what's in the news that all of the US troops have pulled out of Afghanistan rather quickly, and that the Taliban has taken over the country at this point, which,
Yes.
according to Biden and his representations that we've all seen on the news, that they basically expected that, but didn't expect it so quickly. So, what do you have to say to that? I mean, is this something unusual that because it's happened so quickly that they haven't had time to react?
I think that the whole idea of US intervention in that period was, very not well thought out, as often the history of US intervention has sometimes led to more problems than it's solved in the long run for certain countries, certain populations, and certain regions. And, the US intervention in this case, and I think in many other cases around the globe, has also led to refugee crises that may have not occurred or may have not occurred to the degree, that that they would have had the intervention not occurred. I guess it is tough because the Taliban was there before, right? So that might not be exactly be the case here, but I don't know whatever stability was achieved or whatever steps towards democracy or towards a democratic rule of Afghanistan. I don't know what the point is if then you withdraw quickly, and those same forces are obviously present in the region and strong enough to take over the country within a matter of days again.
Yeah. Well, we could talk strictly about politics, and there are plenty of news programs that are doing that, but the purpose of inviting you on today was really to talk about this strictly from an immigration standpoint, and you as an attorney could answer some of those questions. I don't practice immigration, so this is something that I'm very interested in hearing more about from you. So, can you first explain to us what does that mean for somebody to have refugee status according to US law?
Right. So when you hear the term asylum, that is someone who has met the definition of a refugee. An asylee is a refugee, but an asylee applies for asylum or what's considered refugee status within the United States. A refugee is processed abroad for, the same type of status. The legal standard is that the person has to make out a well-founded fear of future persecution based on certain grounds. That could be their race, their religion, their let's see what else, their nationality, which is sometimes distinct from their race, their membership in a particular social group, or their political opinion. So the standard is the same. When people are within the United States, if they make it to a U.S. border and are processed and pass something that's called a credible fear interview, they then can proceed with an asylum claim within the United States through the immigration court system. Other people come in other ways. They come in as students, they come in maybe without inspection, or they come in as visitors and then file for asylum. And then they go through an interview process, first with the Department of Homeland Security. And some of those cases are also referred to immigration court. When refugees are processed outside of the United States, it's almost always through refugee camps. There's no way, for example, really to, or through other international organizations that are facilitating processing of refugees, like the UN High Commissioner on Refugees, and certain other organizations, assist the High Commissioner on Refugees in getting refugees resettled. what's hard is that many people, and Afghan people, have reached out to me in the last week or two and said that things were very bad. So even before we started to see the headlines, I was getting contact from people probably about a week or two ago saying things are really bad. I've got to find a way to get my family or friends out. What do I do? And the answer is tough, because until the US government or the UN or other foreign governments have set up refugee processing in the country to relocate people, which, of course, we know that the Taliban will not really allow a lot of these people in, and the danger factor may be very high, especially at this point, for those foreign personnel to be on the ground there, right? The US government, I think, airlifted all the US government employees out. And I think that was the footage we saw of people grabbing onto the plane, or that was one of the planes. But if there's nothing like that that's set up, really the only option is to get out of the country, to somehow get to a safe third country. And if that country will allow you to claim asylum, and try to live there. If for some reason there's some problem with your living there, then if you make it to another country, like let's say somewhere in Europe, the US or Canada, you can, at least in the case of the US, you can present yourself at a US border. Again, this is different than entering the country illegally. The immigration restrictions have conflated the two things into the same thing, but you can present yourself as a US border if you are a refugee and say, I am afraid to live in my country. I am Afghani. I'm an Afghani woman, for example, and I'm afraid based on what the Taliban's done and is doing to women and girls, right? Or
Yeah.
sometimes there's even more specific things, for example, the female mayor, right, who's announced that she believes the Taliban are coming to kill her any minute now. That would be a very specific political opinion with a gender-based claim, which is a particular social group. And so when people present themselves, at least in the case of US law, they have to very clearly articulate, what their fear is, and as much as possible try to get it to, not obviously modify what their history is or what's happened, but more, sometimes I see people describe a claim and they'll be so vague, or they'll focus on these kind of like esoteric details that relate to the case. And then when I ask certain questions, it's like, okay, if you just focus on the main information, it would be very clear to a US government official that it fits in the gender box, it fits in the political, because they're literally trying to check off which boxes, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes people hurt their own claim by talking about all these other things, like maybe their neighbor was, in the case of Afghanistan, maybe their neighbors were affiliated with the Taliban and were coming after them because they were educating their girls, but they start talking about some dispute with the neighbor over the fence. Well, the dispute with the fence is an asylum. It might just be neighborhood squabbles that occur in every country. But them being affiliated with the Taliban and coming after you because you're educating your girls and harassing you, that fits within the boxes of asylum. So there's sometimes things like that that an attorney can help with, or a qualified representative from a good organization.
Again, we've talked on other occasions about some of those nuances and why it's important to work with an attorney who knows what those nuances are, so that when you do the application, you do it correctly the first time. But for what's happening in Afghanistan right now, how easy is it for somebody there? I'm not there. I imagine chaos is happening, but how easy is it really for someone to just get on a plane and leave and go to a US border? Will they be permitted to just leave?
It's nearly impossible. I don't know how much the Taliban are policing the borders, but I would advise people to get out any way they can. I don't think it's going to be good. And I think any way that they get out of the country to get somewhere safer, it's just, when kind of, maybe it's just also my own family history is triggered when despotism and that type of like authoritarian rule, where they start, targeting certain people and exterminating people, it just never ends well. And the longer it goes on, the harder it is for people to get out, usually because these groups, like the Taliban, solidify their rule and then really clamp down the borders. It's unfortunately because there's not a lot of processing right now. The only people, I checked the State Department website before we logged on, earlier today, and really the only people that they're announcing resettlement for are people that worked with the U.S. government as translators or other officials during the time that the U.S. government was there, in Afghanistan as a presence, and also certain media people, right, that might be targets that aren't necessarily government, but that were working affiliated with or for a U.S. media-based organization because they may be seen as spies or conspirators with the United States. So they would be enhanced targets.
So you're saying that these are people that are living in Afghanistan that could satisfy the refugee status?
Well, a lot of people living in Afghanistan would satisfy the criteria. It's just that from what we can tell thus far, there's no processing, of average civilians, let's say, that didn't have some tie to either the media, a US-based media organization, or a US government entity, or weren't employed as translators or otherwise by the US government during the period that we were there. But these specific people are being given options to try to relocate. And some of them in the United States, and the US government, it was reported today, is also working on where to try to resettle some Afghan refugees in other countries.
So what are you telling the families of people that have family or relatives, friends still in Afghanistan? What are you telling them when they are calling your office and asking, how can I get my family member out of Afghanistan? I mean, what, from a practical perspective, can you really do as an attorney right now?
Well, if they didn't fall in any of those categories, there's probably next to no way to get them out through a plane, right? And I hope that there are ways to get out through the land borders into Pakistan, into other countries. Now there may be cooperate. I don't know. I haven't heard the announcement yet as to what the status of the Pakistani government's cooperation or lack of cooperation with the Taliban is. Right? They did ask certain countries to support them when they took over. But I guess that would, obviously countries in the region have a strong interest in clamping down on the borders too, because they're afraid that they're going to get a huge outflow of people. But I think that any people will get out, one way or another through the land borders, right? And
Yeah.
and probably very few people will get out by plane that don't fall in the categories, at least until there's, I don't know if there's some way that, that things open up more, or that the US government opens up, broader. But I don't think it will expand to all civilians, because it would literally the entire population is terrified. Women and girls aren't leaving their house, right? The Taliban has announced some kind of kinder, gentler platform since they took over, and say that they're looking to integrate women and girls in a Sharia law type of way, which, I think people should know that not everything about Sharia law is necessarily something where we should conflate that with oppression of women. It's traditional Islamic values, but that doesn't mean the Taliban, right? And so I think that there's, hopefully some way people will get out, and get themselves to countries where they can claim asylum. And I think at this point, those claims would not be very difficult to prevail on in any of the countries that I've reviewed the law on: US, Canada, um, Western Europe. I've looked at, kind of what the refugee law, it's all kind of based on international law. And I think that these are going to be, in many cases, very strong or slam dunk cases, because of the conditions in the country, and the crisis, and the particularly, historical targeting of women and girls by the Taliban.
Maybe the better question for you is not how can they get out of Afghanistan. Maybe the better question is what happens if when they get out, they manage to get to a US border. What happens to them then?
So they present themselves at the border. They try to present proof that they are Afghani. So if they can get out with any documents that prove that, because there have been people that pretended to be another nationality. So that's, even though someone's going to say, well, I speak one of the languages of Afghanistan, Dari or Pashto. There have been people that sometimes, for whatever reason, maybe had lived there that were actually Pakistani, or picked up a language or had one parent that was, and were actually nationals of another country. Usually the language will be a pretty strong identifier that they are, but it's good if they have documents. It's good if they have any kind of birth record, marriage records, anything that they have, passports. If they had a passport, I don't know what processing was like of passports during the last few years, but that will be definitive proof that they are Afghani, because there could be a benefit. I'm not saying that there's much of this, but there have been cases where people pretended to be another nationality that was more persecuted, or where the persecution was clear, and presented themselves at a border. So that proof, and to really kind of be sure, there's a high level of trauma right now, but to be sure that before you talk to an official, or people that have relatives there, that you've really kind of thought through what are all the things that happen. Because I'll look at these border records, for people when 3 years later we're finally at the final hearing prep, we're a month before the final hearing, 2 months before. And I'll realize, gee, I thought that what they were saying kind of matched up when we were in the consultation, but now there's these other details they're mentioning. And they'll say, well, I was really traumatized and I didn't think that I had time to mention all this. And I'll say the problem is what you mentioned there left out certain critical events that are now in that record that make it look like you might have just thrown those in the last 3 years, right? And that now we're going before a judge, you've decided to come forward with something that looks more like a developed claim. So I think it's, if you do have relatives there, people that have contact with people that are there or that get out one way or another, hopefully, and do try to present asylum claims, it's very important that that initial contact includes as much clear information as possible. And again, back to my example, if your neighbors were harassing you and, sending the Taliban after you because you were educating your daughters, but you start talking for 30 minutes or however long they give you about a dispute about a fence with them, that's not going to help your case, so also really focusing on the things that have to do. I don't think there's a lot of tribes in Afghanistan, so there may be some race-based claims if certain tribes feel that they're disfavored by the Taliban. I'm not sure about that currently, and I'm not an expert on Afghanistan, but if that was an element, then race. If religion, including being an atheist or not subscribing to the view that Sharia law should be part, there could definitely be religious claims, about the degree that Islam should be practiced or, integrated into someone's life, even if someone is Muslim and says that they are Muslim. In addition, political opinion, anything being anti-Taliban would be very dangerous, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, gender in the particular social group. And there's probably many other particular social groups. Having been a U.S. government ally in one way or another, even if you don't fit in the category for the special visa, maybe you, were thinking of joining something related to the U.S. government when we were there, and you told everyone in the area about that. That would put you, I believe, in a particular social group category that could be recognized under asylum law.
Do you expect to start seeing a flood of asylum applications?
If people can get here, I think we will, and I think that the U.S. government will resettle the people that they've designated, and I hope some others, given our history of intervention in the region. But, those that are resettled from abroad get here with refugee status and then are processed for a green card, usually about a year later. But those that will make it here through other means, either directly or indirectly, I think we're going to see many Afghan asylum claims within the next few years.
Do they have to be here to submit the application, to make the application, or is it something that a relative could do on their behalf?
A relative can't submit it. They either need to start the ball rolling at a U.S. border. That could either be the U.S. or the Canada or Mexico border, at many ports of entry, or if they're already in the country, like, for example, they came in, some other way or without having contact, they must file within a year to qualify for asylum, without some kind of very unusual exception that's hard to get.
Is there anything they can do if they're still in Afghanistan to try to gain entry, permission, a visa, whatever the case may be? You're the immigration attorney, so you tell me. Is there anything they can do if they're in Afghanistan and they want to leave, other than just flee, just get to the border and then go from there?
I don't think there's anything. I mean, I think that the U.S. government has made clear that who they are processing at this point has a history of service to the U.S. government or affiliation with the U.S. media outlet. So I don't see anything that at this point can be done. I am hoping the U.S. government broadens the scope of who they're processing for U.S. visas, to come in as a refugee, and also that they're able both to bring more people in that are just average civilians, as well as help more resettle to safe third countries.
Do you happen to know what other countries, if any, are being hospitable to the Afghanis that are trying to leave?
I think that there was some talk in a Reuters article today that was released today that the State Department was talking to Kosovo and Albania, which is interesting because that region had so much, ethnic cleansing and war itself. But there was some talk that there was part of that region, the Kosovo-Albania region, that the U.S. government was trying to see if they could resettle Afghanis there that needed to be resettled.
So is there any advice that you could give people here in the States that have family or loved ones in Afghanistan right now?
I don't know exactly what the Taliban is doing to secure or control the borders. And again, haven't read a clear report as to how much Pakistan is cooperating with them on keeping that border, airtight. But I know that this, Christina, the history of my grandparents was that it was my great grandparents, and it was only my great grandmother because of a regime like this. And it wasn't all of my grandmother's siblings. It was some of them that could survive, and another cousin that just had lost both his parents and absolutely everyone, who was still about 10. And so they just literally had to find a way to get out, and they did it. And that was of Turkey during World War I, at the fall of the Ottoman Empire, during the Armenian genocide. And I assume there's going to be some very similar stories, that people and my family went, at first they went to Greece, then they eventually got to Mexico. Some of my family, as stayed in Mexico. And then some of, my grandmother came to the U.S. because my grandfather went to Mexico to marry her. But I think this is a very typical refugee story. And we're going to hear this from many Afghani people multiple generations later. Maybe I'll meet some Afghani Mexicans in a few.
Yeah. Yeah. It breaks my heart to see what's happening there. I can, as I was going to bed last night in my comfortable bed and, my quiet town, I felt really lucky and I was thinking about a lot of Afghani women and children, men too, who weren't having the same experience. And it really breaks my heart to see that there are people like this in the world living this way.
The footage of that plane, when the plane was trying to take off and people literally wouldn't get off, they wouldn't let go. Just to know that if you stay, I had said this recently on, Christina had been kind enough to post another podcast that I was a guest on. She and I both have podcasts, but I was on the podcast Otra Ex Favor, which is hosted by two really funny, great guys. And I think I had said just the whole idea that whatever you have to do to leave is better than staying. Even if you literally have to risk your life, it's more secure than staying, because you know that staying is not going to work out well. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing here.
I know I'm asking you sort of off the cuff, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but do you feel like there was a better way for the U.S. to have done this, to have pulled out? And if so, do you have any ideas how that could have been better?
I mean, wasn't even the U.S. withdrawal, and I don't know if we have any people in Iraq. So I do follow geopolitics and human rights issues closely, but I'm an expert on whether the U.S. withdrawal from Iraq is complete, because I know it was a phased withdrawal, right, from Iraq. And I know that Iraq is, still plagued by many problems, but I don't think we had this kind of a chaotic scene when the US withdrew, with literally people trying to grab onto moving vehicles and planes that they thought could get them to safety. So I would think that a phased withdrawal of some type might have been a little better. I mean, I just don't really know what the thinking was, because the Taliban is still there. Like, they've never really disappeared from the scene. So it just also seems to all of us kind of pointless. We've all invested tax dollars, undoubtedly, as long as this went on and as extensive the operation was there, only to just be kind of back to the future, this
Yeah.
years later.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. And I can't help but feel like, well, what have we been doing then? What was the purpose of all of that? Although I think Biden made a good point, is that there was never going to be a good time to leave, but I think there could have been a better way.
Yeah, I think
So,
so.
yeah. So I know in particular what I've been reading is educating myself, is that it's of particular concern for women and girls. And I know you know a little bit more about that than I do. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I'm definitely, again, not an expert on Afghanistan or that exact region, so I don't want to, portray that I am. And I do have certain friends and clients that are Afghani, or have had Afghani clients. And I do have a close friend that was really worried about his family. So we were in touch. And in fact, we're supposed to talk later today just to catch up as to what's going on or what he's hearing, so I may have even more information, in a few days. But I know this, okay, and I think the Taliban has announced as recently as yesterday or today that they do want to integrate women in a way that's Islamist, and that is Sharia law abiding. Um, I don't want us to conflate Islam or even Sharia law with all being oppressive towards women, but the Taliban itself has traditionally disfavored women, doing things like choosing whether to cover or not, right? Which is an option in many Muslim countries. They've also disfavored women and girls, pursuing certain careers or higher education, or really many goals that many Afghani women have expressed are very important to them, right? During the period, they apparently either burned or destroyed a beauty salon where they do aesthetic stuff. I think that was today. So there's also kind of the idea that women should be covered, whether they want to or not, and definitely being, wearing something like what's called a hijab is a valid choice for a woman, based on her religion. I'm not saying that, but it seems that they're eliminating that choice and making some strong signals that will be disfavored. And I believe it's the female mayor of Kabul, right, who was elected, has said publicly and in interviews that they're coming to kill her. So that tells you that there is a war on women and girls when they do things that act outside of a totally traditional realm, right, of what these men, because the Taliban are led by men. They're not, I know they're making some signals that they want to integrate women in a certain way, but that they've decided are the options for women and girls in Afghani society.
It really does break my heart. I hope that you will. I know that you will, if you can help in any way, that you will. I feel confident about that. If there are any people out there at that, because you're not just limited to representing people that are in California, how should they reach out to you if they have questions or are in need of your services?
Yeah, well, I both like to, just offer, if there are people that need actual representation, to contact my office, which is 559-264-2500. That's a number in Fresno, California. Here in the Bay Area, there are a lot of Afghani people in the Bay Area. 415-398-4444. And you can also use that number if you or your family are in the Los Angeles area at this point, because we'll schedule a Zoom or something to try to talk. But if there is something to do, or people that are already here, maybe some people, like my friend was trying to get some of his family out weeks ago. Maybe there's people that made it here that now need to file. That's what I'm hoping. And that people like me that have a lot of asylum-based experience can help with some of that as a first step. I'd also like to talk to the people I know to be sure that, apart from refugee type organizations like the IRC, the International Rescue Committee, there's a Lutheran organization also, obviously giving to those once we're able to connect with people. Those kind of nonprofits help people with refugee efforts, and some of them are able to do things abroad too because they have extensive networks. But absent that, I'd really like to hear more from my Afghani friends and their families as to where they think, how, if at all, we can help, right? Because apart from anyone that may get refugee status, I'm just wondering, is there any way to get people stuff, even if they stay? Because a lot of women and girls are staying in. The streets are kind of empty, right?
Yeah.
Except for the kind of chaotic scenes where people are jumping onto moving planes and stuff. They said women and girls are not going out because they do not believe they'll be safe. And there have been rapes. There have been, I don't know if they said that women and girls believe they would be targeted if they didn't cover, or choose to wear the hijab, or if they said that, that there had actually been incidents of beatings or violence against women that chose not to wear the hijab. And keep in mind too, I think for Afghanistan, the traditional garb is called something different than a hijab. I think that's the general, but there's several different names for the covering of a woman in the Islamic, religion and cultures. So I'm not sure that what they wear is technically called the hijab, but I think most people know what I'm talking about when I say that term, right? Yeah.
No, and thank you for pointing that out. I would be interested to know that too. I feel very small right now. I don't, I'm not an immigration attorney. At least you can help in some way. I feel very small. Like I don't know what I could possibly do, but if there is a way to donate, money or products so that women have access to them, I would love to know how to do that. So if anybody is aware of that, please let us know. Send me a message.
I'll
Send
post some
Jessica.
stuff and I'll share it once I talk to a few more Afghani people, because I think they're in touch. Always there's sometimes donate to this organization, donate to this, but I just really like to know, we're only going to get so many people out at this point, right? I mean, even those that have, family and maybe access to resources somehow to try to get into a neighboring country and maintain themselves until they could get somewhere else to claim asylum. But I'm wondering about all those women and girls. Many were able to work, I believe, in different industries now during these last few years. So it's like you can't go to work and you feel like you need to be locked in your house in some cases to be safe. So who's going to support you, and how do we get those people at least support until things change or until they can find a creative way to get out of the country?
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll have to see what's on the news and what we're hearing from other people. But any way that I can help, happy to do it, even if it's a small way.
Yeah.
And I'd love to have you on again too. I expect that you will start hearing from people, and you'll see what's actually happening in
I'm
terms of applications.
just today, so maybe we can do an update in a week or two, and then maybe I'll have a clearer list of organizations. I think if everyone wants to just kind of, unless you really hear this organization is able to somehow get people things, be careful, because there's always scams. I mean, obviously we're all heartbroken by this. I think anyone who watches it, and it's very triggering for me because I think it raises a lot of my personal family history to see these images, and my first instinct is just to do something, whatever I can. But I think it would be good if people, like, if they're putting aside, if they're like, okay, I'm going to try to give $20 a week if I knew it could help an Afghani woman or girl that can't work and needs to flee, but let's be sure that, because there's
Yeah.
always things that emerge during these situations that some are very legit, some think they're legit and end up having corruption within, or they don't have the direct line that they thought. So I just want people to be careful, because obviously if we can get people resources, that's going to be so valuable.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right about that. So let's check in a couple of weeks, and you and I will be talking. So if there's anything else that you feel like you just want to do sort of as a public service announcement to people that want to help, or to families here that are affected by what's going on in Afghanistan, then please feel free to let me know.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this, Christina. And I think a lot of people are going to benefit from it, and we can record something else very soon when we have more information.
All right. Well, thank you for watching or listening. And if you have questions, you can reach Jessica at attorneyjessica.com. And you can also find her on social media, and you can always DM me as well. Thank you. Have a good
Thank you
night.
very much.